It's the 2022 World Cup. It's Ghana's players. Hello and welcome to the International Soccer Preview by Soccerphiles Canada. I'm Kevin and today we'll be looking at Ghana's squad for the 2022 World Cup. For those looking for a quick version of this, you can skip to near the end of the video or the podcast. The last 4 or 5 minutes, I'd say, where we summarize the likely starters. And for a little more, just prior to that, with about 10 minutes remaining, we'll have some discussion on the squad, the main issues with the squad, how we see their overall strength and what they look like going into the Cup, as well as the players and issues to look out for. So we'll put those times in the show notes so you can find the part that you're most interested in. For those looking for a deeper dive, we go through the players to explain why we think they are candidates, and we give some information on their history and their standing with the squad. So the way we do this is first by organizing the players into their designated positions. It should be noted that these are a little bit artificial since players don't always play in their coded position, but it's nevertheless a good way to organize the discussion. Then we go through the players and share some of the data we've collected in our files. And using that data, we try to predict how likely the player is to make the team. That's based mostly on their recent participations, but a couple of other factors as well. We categorize these players into definite, likely, possible but unlikely, and seems to be off the squad. We're also going to mention big players who have recently retired and make note of any who we know to be currently injured. And we'll also try to determine which players will be starters and which will be substitutes. Right, now for those who are following on YouTube, we run a very simple graphic where we list the names and you can actually see the players' names and how they're spelled. We might actually be mispronouncing a few of them. And it's the same broadcast for the podcast. So for listeners, we're going to try to repeat the names a few times to help listeners familiarize themselves with those names. So that when they step onto the field, you have some idea of who they are. But that's as much as we can do at this point. But as the rosters are being published, we will do an update episode. So that will essentially be going over our predictions, updating them based on more information from the games played between now and then, and revealing which players were selected when the rosters are actually published. So keep your eye out for that in probably early November, an update on each team and their players. Okay, well, we're going to begin with a bit of overall discussion. We did do a podcast for Ghana in the lead up to the 2021 African Cup, which confusingly took place in early 2022. And yeah, we'll just start with a couple of things we noticed from that podcast. So one of the things, there are 3 things here. One of them is that they seemed pretty undecided on who their goalkeeper was. And we'll talk more about that as we go through the podcast, especially when we hit the goalkeepers. Another thing we noticed is that they were a bit overloaded with central midfielders. So a lot of the players, and even a lot of the players who were starting a lot, were central midfielders. We kind of wondered how they were going to fit them all onto the field. The same is kind of true for attacking midfielders. But now we have more light on that, seeing how they set up in the African Cup and in the games that followed. And I guess alongside a lot of central midfielders, we noticed that they have few right and left midfielders, actually few right and left wingers too. So very players who are coded very centrally in the field, but not so much on the outsides. And we will talk about that. And finally, we noticed that they basically had no forwards, no players that we coded as definite or likely in the forward line. So through the podcast, we'll see how they coped with that. Next, we're going to take a look at their formations for recent games. And boy, oh boy, they've really been all over the place. We're talking about now 3 games in the African Cup. They got knocked out in the group stage there, quite disappointingly. That cost the manager his job. Game 1 was with Morocco, and game 2 with Gabon, and game 3 with Comoros. That was all for the African Cup, but they've played quite a few games since, 6 games since, and the first 2 were against Nigeria in qualifying for this 2022 World Cup. Well, Nigeria was expected to win that, but Ghana did. So coming off a poor African Cup, they made it to the World Cup, so good for them. And then they had 2 games, so that was 2 games with Nigeria, home and away, the playoff. And then they had 2 games for African Cup 2023 qualifying. Those were in June. And so they played at home to Madagascar and away in Central African Republic. And finally, they participated in a kind of a friendly tournament in Japan. So we regard these games as friendlies, and one was against Japan and the other was against Chile. So they never used the same lineup twice in a row, and in fact, over the course of those 9 games, never used any single formation more than once. Oh, wait, they did. They used a 4-2-3-1 3 times. They used a 4-3-3 twice. They used a 4-4-2 once. No, that looks like twice. And to cap things off in those 2 friendlies in Japan, they used formations that they had not used before. So a 5-3-2 and a 4-4-1. So the only real thing I can say about that, other than the fact that they haven't locked down a consistent formation, is that they generally have 4 or 5 players in the midfield. So that goes a little way to explaining why they have so many central midfielders and central attacking midfielders. All right, well, let's move on to talk about the players, and we begin with the manager. So their manager, I'll begin with the outgoing manager because he got fired after the African Cup, and that is Milovan Rajevac. Milovan Rajevac was actually coaching Ghana for the 2nd time in his career. He coached them around 2010, where they performed very well in the World Cup. But not so well this time. As you know, they were knocked out in the group stage, and that cost him his job. So the incoming manager is Otto Addo. Otto Addo. I'm just organizing the graphics here on the YouTube version. Otto Addo. So Otto Addo was a manager, is the new manager, was a player for Ghana around 2000 to 2008. Sorry, his actual career spans 1998 to 2006. So he only had 15 caps and 2 goals for the club, but he did play in a few tournaments, but it was only a starter in the 2000 African Cup. He was born in Germany. And prior to getting the job as manager of the national team, he was actually appointed interim manager after they fired Rajevac. But he had been in and around the Ghana national team for quite a few years as an assistant manager and as a scout, actually around 2016. But he had similar jobs for some clubs in Germany, Borussia Mönchengladbach and Borussia Dortmund. He was a talent coach. Then he became an assistant coach with Borussia Dortmund, so kind of moved his way up. Anyway, manager Otto Addo we'll put as a definite because it would be a surprise if they changed at this point. And we move on to goalkeepers. So what I'm going to do here is just introduce the names I'll be talking about. It gives a little context when we talk about the situation. So the first name, which we have as a definite, is Lawrence Atizigi. And then as a likely, we have Jojo Wallacott, sometimes called Joe Wallacott. As a possible candidate, we have the veteran keeper Richard O'Forey. Not such a veteran, actually, but a veteran among these, as we'll see. And we also have Abdul Nuruddin as a possible candidate. And then, as seems to be off the squad, is Razak Abalora. But there is a reason we are including them in the discussion. And the reason is usually they've been around recently enough that we think there's an outside chance they'll be called back. Another seems to be off the squad is Richard Atta, Gladson Awako, and Abdul Fatawu Daouda. So we won't go into detail on those players. And I suppose if they're selected, we will go into more detail in the update podcast. So going back to the top, actually going back to what I said earlier, they were undecided on goalkeepers going into the 2021 African Cup earlier this year, and they ended up bringing very little experience into the Cup. I must say I was a bit surprised that they didn't bring Richard O'Forey, at least until we learned that he had been injured. However, he's now recovered, but still doesn't seem to be involved much. So they ended up bringing new players into the Cup. So it was Richard O'Forey in the 2019 African Cup, but they went with Jojo Wallacott as their starter in 2021. However, in games since then, they now seem to be favoring Lawrence Atizigi. So that's why we have him as a definite to make the Cup, although we're still a bit unsure who the starter will be. And they only brought actually two goalkeepers, it seems, to those friendly games in Japan. And we'll include that in our discussion here. Okay, so let's begin with Lawrence Atizigi. So the reason we have him as a definite is that he started 2 of their games since the recent African Cup and was on the bench for 3 others. So we think he's definitely going to be there, at least as a substitute. And that's what he was in 2021. He was on the roster and saw no action there. He was also on the roster for the 2019 African Cup, a backup keeper who saw no action. And he's been with Ghana since 2017. He's got 10 caps now and is 26 years old. And he plays for St. Gallen in Switzerland and was with Sochaux in France before that and Red Bull Salzburg before that. So his first tournament was the 2019 African Cup. And as I said, he was a bench player for 2019 and 2021 African Cup, but has recently been starting games. Moving on to the likely candidate, Jojo Wallacott. He started the first 3 games since the African Cup in January. However, he was not selected for the last 3 matches. So that kind of moved him down to the likely category in our view. He would have been in the definite category and probably will reach play in the Cup, be selected for the Cup. He was the starter in the 2021 African Cup. A bit of a surprise choice, really, because his first cap had been in 2021. And by now he has 10 caps and is 26 years old. He plays for Charlton Athletic, I think recently moved to Charlton Athletic in England from Swindon. And he played for Bristol before that. So really not very big clubs in England, not a big club affiliation there. So we were, excuse me, I had to cough. We were a bit surprised that he kind of quickly came in as a starting keeper for 2021. But as we've seen, he may be on his way out now. 2 of those matches were friendlies in Japan, so we shouldn't put too much into that, although most of their top players did show up. But a bit concerning that he hasn't been selected for the last 3 matches. All right, moving on to the possible candidate, Richard Ofori. So we've said a couple of things about him being a veteran, but actually he started none of their games since the African Cup, and he was only on the bench for the first 2 of these, so not selected for the last 4 matches. So when I saw that he was injured, I thought, oh, okay, well, he'll probably kind of come back into the picture. And he did a little bit, but not as much as expected. He was a starter for the 2019 African Cup, but as we said, not selected in 2021, it turned out, because he was injured. So he has been with the squad since 2015 and has 25 caps. And he's still young for a goalkeeper at 29 years old. And he plays for the Orlando Pirates in South Africa, and was with Maritzburg in South Africa before that. So he was a substitute or a backup keeper in the 2017 African Cup, where he did start game 3, but that was a B team game. And then was a starter in 2019, injured for 2021. All right, the next possible candidate is Abdul Nuruddin. Abdul Nuruddin started actually the last of their 6 games, their 6 recent games. So that was one of those friendlies in Japan. But he was also on the bench for 4 of the 6 games. So we think he's a very possible candidate to be selected for the squad, even if he is a backup keeper. He's only been on the squad since this year, 2022, and he has 2 caps. He plays for Eupen in Belgium, and interestingly, because this World Cup is in Qatar, he came out of the Aspire Academy in Qatar, that famous academy that has produced most of Qatar's players. So he was a backup keeper for the African 2021 Cup, and that was his first cup, of course. So I should actually... it's a 2021 Cup, but it was in 2022. Okay, and the other players, we have 4 goalies who seem to be off the squad now. So I'll just quickly tell you why they appear here. So Razak Abalora has 4 caps for the team since 2020, and but he last appeared for the team in June 2021. So it looks like he was kind of a consideration for the squad who didn't end up making it. Next one is Richard Atta, and he was actually a backup keeper in the 2021 African Cup, but he hasn't appeared even on the bench since then. So he doesn't have any caps for the teams, and he plays in Ghana for one of their main teams, Hearts of Oaks. The third one is Gladstone Awako, and he last appeared for the national team in a qualification game in March 2021. So hasn't really been a consideration for the A team. He actually was for the African National Championship, which is a local tournament. And he's eligible to play for that because he plays in Africa, also with Heart of Oaks. So not likely there, and he's 32 years old. So I really doubt he's going to be there. Finally, Abdul Fatawu Daouda last appeared for the national team in November 2020. Now, he was part of the team. He had 26 caps from 2008 to 2020. He's probably too old now because he is 37, but he was basically a backup keeper in most of those tournaments from 2008 to 2017. And he was even the starter in the 2013 African Cup, but seems well out of the picture now. So if we go over the key names again, we have Lawrence Atiziga as a definite, as in terms of being selected. And we have Jojo Walcott as likely. And we have Richard Oforo and Abdul Nuruddin as possibles. Now, I wouldn't be bold enough to say who I think is going to start there. Lawrence Atiziga and Jojo Walcott seem to have kind of an equal chance. But I guess that kind of comes down to why Jojo Walcott missed those last 3 games, and I'm not sure what the reason is. So perhaps we'll get more light on that when we do the update podcast. All right, moving on to defenders. We do have a category for general or versatile defenders, but Ghana doesn't have anyone in that position, so we move to central defenders. And we'll begin actually with a player moving out of the picture, or is out of the picture, but a veteran, John Boy. So we'll just talk about him enough to show that there's a bit of a gap after he left. Daniel Amarty is a definite candidate, and he was actually there before Boy left. But Boy seems to be replaced by the likely candidate, the candidate we have as likely, Alexander Jiku. We have a couple of possible candidates. One is Joseph Adu, and the other is Jonathan Mensah. Oh, we have a few actually. We have Abdul Mumin, and we have Aladou Seydou. And then we have a couple who seem to be off the team in Ismail Ganiyu and Nicholas Opoku. So we'll just give them a quick mention, and we'll go back to the beginning by talking about John Boy. Now, I won't give his whole biography. People who are familiar with Ghana will be quite familiar with that name at least. He was on the team since 2008 and had 70 caps over that period, but he last played in 2020. So I mention him really because he was a starter in the African Cup 2017 and 2019. He played cups all the way from the 2012 African Cup, but I won't review that. He was a starter, and he actually got ejected in game 1 in the 2019 African Cup. So that he seemed a bit bewildered when he got his red card there. But anyway, so that pretty much meant the end for him. He did return to start games 3 and 4 in that tournament, but he didn't. He wasn't really even a candidate for the 2021 African Cup because he played his last game in November 2020. So there we have it. He's 35 years old, so basically aging out. So we'll talk about that gap that needed to be filled. However, it wasn't Daniel Amarty who filled that gap, but we consider Daniel Amarty a definite candidate. He started all 6 of their games since the African Cup in 2020, in January this year, and he was a starter in that cup too, starting and finishing all games. He's been with the squad since 2015 and has 43 caps and is 28 years old. And he plays for Leicester in England. He was with Copenhagen in Denmark before that, and Djurgårdens in Sweden. But he's been with Leicester for a long time, since 2016. And his first tournament was the 2015 African Cup, where he was a starter and also a starter in the 2017 African Cup. However, for the 2019 African Cup, he had a broken ankle, so wasn't there for that cup, but came back in 2021 to start. So he looks like a fixture in central defence. The other one, I wouldn't say it's up for grabs because Alexander Jiku seems to have grabbed it. He started the first 2 of their 6 games since the African Cup. However, he wasn't played for the last, he wasn't selected for the last 4 matches. So he seemed to grab it, but now may have slipped from his grasp, to beat that metaphor to death. Okay, so he actually has been with the team just since 2020, but has 17 caps and even 1 goal since then. He's 28 years old, so a fairly latecomer to the squad. He plays for Strasbourg in France, where he was born actually, and all of his clubs have been in France, starting with the Bastia Youth Club. So yes, he kind of came into the picture quickly and seized the starting position alongside Daniel Amarty, was the starter and finisher in the 2021 African Cup. But as I've said, in the last couple of games, last 4 games, he hasn't been selected. So maybe we'll get more information on why that is. But that is why we moved him from definite to likely. So other candidates who might move into the position or who might be selected for the Cup and be on the bench, Joseph Adu. Joseph Adu. So he started none of their 6 games since the African Cup, but he was on the bench for the first 2 of those. And he wasn't selected for the 2021 African Cup. He was selected for the preliminary squad, but didn't make the final cut. But he's kind of still in the picture because he was involved in the 2019 African Cup as a bench player, and he appeared in game 3 there, starting and finishing. It should be said he lined up. No, he was a central defender there. Okay, and the part of the other reason we see him as likely as possible is because his club is Celta de Vigo in Spain and Genk in Belgium, which are fairly reputable clubs. He's been with Ghana since 2019 and has 10 caps, and he's 27 years old. So kind of still around, especially playing or especially appearing on the bench after the recent African Cup. So maybe he will get onto the squad. Jonathan Mensah is also a possible candidate, and he's a real veteran with the team. But we'll tell you why we selected him here as a possible. He started one of their 4 games since the 2022 African Cup, and he was on the bench for one other. But again, not selected for 4 games. I mean, again, as in same as Joseph Adu. I think I'm just going to put him ahead on the possible list of Joseph Adu there because he has actually played a game. He was a sub in the 2021 African Cup, but actually he didn't see any action, so spent the time on the bench there. But he is a veteran. He's been with the team since 2009 and has 70 caps, and he is 32 years old. And he recently, oh no, not recently, he moved to America to play with Columbus Crew in USA and was with Anzi in Russia. That was a team they poured a lot of money into, and a lot of players went there and then suddenly left, if I have the story right. And he's played in Spain, France, and Italy and South Africa, all over the place. And he has been with the African Cup team and participating in African Cup since the 2010 African Cup, mostly as a substitute, but around 2014 for the World Cup, he got a starting position, and for the 2015 African Cup too. And then he went back to being a sub after that. But he's still kind of in and around a little bit, so probably not a starter, but I wouldn't be surprised if he made the cut. The next possible candidate is Abdul Mumin. So Abdul Mumin started none of their 6 games since the recent African Cup, but was on the bench for 2 of them. He was actually selected for the 2021 African Cup, but he sat on the bench the whole time. So he's been with the team since 2022, but still to earn his first cap, the 24-year-old. And he plays for Vitória Guimarães in Portugal and was in Denmark before that, with a couple of teams in Denmark. And there we have it. So his first tournament, that 2021 African Cup. So a young player who could make it. Finally, as a possible candidate, we have Aladou Seydou, and including his first appearance on the bench in June of this year, he started the last 2 of their games there. So he spent 2 matches on the bench and then played in those friendlies in Japan. And I should say he actually played one game as a central defender and the other as a right defender, whatever that means. And he got a red card in that last game. I think it was against Chile. And I don't know if that affects him, because it was a friendly, if that affects him in the games he'll play after this. Nevertheless, I'm going to actually put him, he seems like actually maybe a bit more likely than Jonathan Mensah. I'm not dead sure. But so Aladou Seydou, a young player coming in. I don't know if I mentioned his age, but he's 22 years old. Okay, and then we have two players who are who seem to be off the squad, and that is Ismail Ganiou. So I'll just say he last appeared for the national team in November 2021, and he plays in Ghana. And the other one is Nicholas Opoku, and he also last appeared for the team in 2021 in June. So off the team a bit longer than Ganiou there. But he does play for Udinese in Italy and has done so since 2018. And I think he's currently on a long loan to Amiens in France. So the club affiliation actually does matter and may make him more of a candidate, but I suppose it comes down to how well he's playing for those teams. So an outside chance, and I'll put Nicholas Opoku above Ganiou because I think the club affiliations will favor him there. So in review of central defenders, we have definite candidate Daniel Amarte, who will be a starter. And will be a starter. And we have Alexander Djiku, who didn't play the last few games, so I'm not confident to put him as a starter, but I think he'll make the cup and at least be a substitute. And Jonathan Mensah, Aladou Seydou, Joseph Adu, and Abdul Mumin, all possible candidates. At least a couple of them should be chosen, but I don't have the confidence to say any of them will be starters. All right, well, let's move on to left backs, and I'll introduce the players first. So first is Baba Rahman, and I gotta say, when I first met Baba Rahman, I didn't meet him, I just mean when he first came into my sphere of attention, he was called Baba Rahman, but I saw that on his shirt he has Baba on the back, and now I see on some of the sources he's just listed as Baba or Rahman Baba. So you get these players once in a while whose first and last names get kind of mixed up. Anyway, I'm going to continue calling him Baba Rahman until I receive definitive evidence otherwise. We have a likely candidate in Gideon Mensah, and we have a possible candidate in Dennis Nkrumah Corsa. Then we have Montari Kamaheni as a possible but unlikely, and Ibrahima Imoro as a player who seems to be off the squad. So we'll go back to the beginning there with Baba Rahman. He's kind of a veteran for the team, at least since 2014 when he earned his first cap. And he started 2 of their 6 games after the recent African Cup. However, he was injured for the first 2, and he was on the bench for one of them. So he came back. So probably would have played more games, but that he was injured. And he was a starter in the 2021 African Cup. So we have him as a definite candidate. He's been with Ghana since 2014 and has 46 caps and 1 goal. And he's 28 years old. And he plays for Chelsea in England and has done so since 2015. But I don't think, in fact, I know he hasn't kind of nailed down a starting position. I've seen him on the field here and there. He's also been loaned out. So he was loaned to Reading most recently, but he was loaned to PAOK in Greece and Mallorca and in France and Germany, all over the place. He actually came to Chelsea from Augsburg in Germany. I thought he might be born in Germany. No, he wasn't, because his youth club was his first club was in Ghana. Okay, so he's been with the team since 2015. He was a starter in the African 2015 Cup, and again in 2017 Cup, but he got injured in game one early there, just 39 minutes in, so he was out for the tournament. And he was on the bench for the first game of 2019, but assumed a starting position from game two onwards. So, and then a starter in 2020-21. So that's why we have him as a definite candidate, giving them some experience there. The next one is far less experienced, Gideon Mensah, and almost seems to be challenging Baba Rahman for that position because he's played it a lot. He started 4 of their 6 games since the recent African Cup, but he wasn't selected for the last 2 friendlies. There are a few top players who didn't make that trip to Japan. But now I'm thinking that at least 2 of those starts were because Baba Rahman was injured. So we'd have to say Baba Rahman still holds the spot. Gideon Mensah was at the 2021 African Cup. That was his first tournament, but he was on the bench the whole time. So he has been with the team since 2019 and has 11 caps, and he's 24 years old. And he plays for Auxerre in France. That's a recent move. He was with Red Bull Salzburg for 5 years before that, but Salzburg loaned him out actually most of the time that he was there. So Gideon Mensah, first tournament in 2021, 21 or January 2022 on the bench. The possible candidate is Dennis Nkrumah Corsa. Dennis Nkrumah Corsa. And he is brand new to the squad. He's been on the team just since 2022. His first cap was in March of this year. And he started actually the first of their 6 games since the 2022 African Cup. I just want to make sure because that would have been the important game against Nigeria. And he was on the bench for that game, actually, so I'm not sure which game it was he started. Anyway, he has 4 caps and is not young, 26 years old, so another player who kind of joined the team a little bit later, and he plays for Hearts of Oaks in Ghana, so a local-based player there. I'm just burning to know which it is of the games he started. It was one of those friendlies in Japan, not the game against Nigeria. I would have been surprised if he had started, although they did start one new player against Nigeria that surprised me, but that's a story for later. The possible but unlikely player is Montari Kamaheni. So he first appeared on the bench for 2 games in November 2021 before the African Cup there. But he wasn't selected for the African Cup, but he was on the bench again in March 22. However, he then suffered a cruciate ligament injury. That's the one that often takes 6. I'm not a doctor. I know from soccer, though, that it takes, I think, 9 months to a year to heal. So he may be injured for the African Cup, but it looked like he was kind of making inroads there. He plays for Ashdod in Israel, and the 22-year-old doesn't have any caps yet. So I'm saying possible but unlikely, provided he recovers from injury. The player who we think is off the team now is Ibrahim Amoro. He last appeared for the national team in March 2021, and he has appeared in the local tournament, the African National Championship, since, but not a likely candidate. So going over the candidates, I would say from the evidence, Baba Rahman still holds down the starting position. And Gideon Mensah, I thought he was making a challenge, but perhaps he was just replacing Baba Rahman when he was injured. And then we have Dennis Nkrumah Corsa as a possible candidate. All right, let's move over to the right back position. And we don't have a definite candidate there. So sometimes it happens that if they have an overload of left backs, I'm thinking of Gideon Mensah, they'll move him over to the right. And in fact, we did see that young central defender, Aladou Seydu, play on the right for one of those friendlies in Japan. However, the person most likely in the position is Andy Yiadom, but we don't have him as a definite, but as a likely, and I'll talk soon about that. Other candidates at the possible level are Dennis O'Doy and Abdul Fattah Mohammed, both possible candidates. And then seemingly off the team, we have Benson Anang and Philemon Bafour, who in our podcast leading up to this tournament, in our podcast for the 2021 African Cup last January, I'm supposed to be referring to that here and there. He took us by surprise by being selected to the squad kind of unexpectedly, but I'm jumping ahead of myself there. So I'll go back to talk about Andy Yiadom, the likely candidate. So Andy Yiadom has started 2 of their 6 games since the recent African Cup and subbed in for 2 others, on the bench for 1 and not selected for 1. Andy Yiadom was the starter in the 2021 African Cup, so a good candidate for being the starter here. He has been with Ghana since 2017 and has 26 caps and is 31 years old. And he plays for Reading in England. He was born in England, so he has played for clubs in England, starting with the Watford Youth Club, but actually fairly small clubs in England: Hayes, Braintree, Barnet, Barnsley, and then Reading. So kind of moving up to bigger clubs. Reading is still in the 2nd division of England there, so it's not an impressive club affiliation there. So his first tournament was the African Cup 2017, where he was a bench player, but he did start. They actually had 2 B team games in that tournament, and he started both of them. But he started as a right back in one of them and the left back in the other. So maybe his position is not fully decided yet. Well, it is. He's a right back since then. He was a right back in all 4 starts of the African Cup 2019 and also in the 2021 African Cup. So the most likely candidate there. And Dennis O'Doy is a possible candidate. His first cap was in March 2022, and he started... does that mean he too started the Nigeria game? And in this case, it's true. So a bit of a surprise to start a rookie in such an important game, the World Cup playoff with Nigeria. But he did. I'll just check whether he started the second one too. Yeah, he started both. Wow. So that's big. He was born in Belgium and played for Club Bruges in Belgium. He actually played for the Belgium national team in 2012. And I've been talking about him as if he's a young player. He is new to the squad. His first cap was in 2022. But holy cow, he's 34 years old. So he's been around for a long time. Before Club Bruges, he was with Fulham in England for 6 years. And so I'm actually going to move him up to likely maybe the biggest strike against him there is his age. 34 years old is a bit old as a soccer player. Defenders have a bit longer of a lifespan. it seems, but very surprising that he's moved into the position and is actually challenging Yiadom for it there. Okay, the next possible candidate is Abdul Fatawu Mohammed, and he last appeared for the national team in 2021. So I'm not sure why I have him as a possible candidate here. He wasn't on the African Cup squad, and I'm going to move him down to seems to be off the squad actually. Yeah, there's nothing really nothing really to justify him being a possible candidate. Okay, and we have two who seem to be off the squad. Benson Anang last played for the team in March 2021. He's a young player, but didn't. It seemed like he got a look at and then was not considered any further. And I mentioned Philemon Bafour as a surprise candidate who surprised us by making the roster for the 2021 African Cup. But it turned out he was not even on the bench for game one and was just on the bench otherwise. So he made a move from Dreams FC Academy in Ghana to Rio Ave in Portugal this year. And while Rio Ave is not a huge team, that is a good move for him. So he still doesn't have any caps, but he was on the 2021 African Cup squad, and he is 21 years old. So maybe someone we will see down the road. So a review of right backs. We have Andy Yiadom and perhaps Dennis O'Doy challenging his position, or perhaps an out of position player challenging it. He doesn't seem to have it fully nailed down, although he was the starting right back in each of the last cups. Okay, and we'll move on to midfield now. We'll start with, well, we have a category for general or versatile midfielders, but we don't have anyone who's kind of coded that way. So we will move on to defensive midfielders. So in our previous podcast, we didn't have anyone in the definite or likely position or possible position, but now we have a new player coming in the possible position, and that player is Alicia Owusu. Alicia Owusu, and we have Afriye Aqua as a player who seems to be off the squad there. So we'll go back to Owusu. So he earned his first cap in March of this year, 2022, and he hadn't started any of the games, but he was subbed in for one of them and on the bench for one of them. And he plays for Ghent in Belgium, and he just has that one cap, and he's 25 years old. He was born in France. So perhaps will make the squad. We have him as a possible. The other defensive midfielder is Afriye Aqua, and I'm pretty sure I'm saying that name wrong. So I have to talk to a Ghanaian person about that. But he seems to be off the squad. He last appeared for the team in March 2021. But he was in and around the squad all the way from 2012 to 2021, but never, he was a part of 4 tournaments, but never as a starter. Anyway, he seems to be out of the picture now, so we won't dwell on him. So not a lot of players coded as defensive midfielders, but as I said near the beginning, they do have a lot of players coded as central midfielders. So we have 2 definite candidates in Thomas Partey and Mohamed Kudus. And we have 2 likely candidates in Idrisu Baba and in Edmund Addo. And we have a possible candidate in Mubarak Wakaso. Okay, and then we have 2 players who seem to be off the squad. in Emmanuel Lamoti and Majid Ashimeru, but they've been around recently enough that they could make a comeback, and that's why we have them here. Okay, so as it turned out, even though we said going into the Cup that they kind of overloaded with central midfielders, it turned out that Kudus and Wakaso were both unavailable. So Partey and Baba were the main ones in the Cup. Edmund Addo was strangely ignored as a starter, and instead they pulled back an attacking midfielder who I'll mention later to play in the central midfield. And as we said at the beginning, they don't have many left or right midfielders, so these players tend to fill in, and that explains why they have so many who seem to be starters. So some of these players are kind of moved from the central part of the field to the right or the left part of the field. We'll begin with Thomas Partey here. So he is a definite candidate, and he started the first 2 of their 6 games since the African Cup. However, he was injured for the last 4 of those. Nevertheless, it seems like he'll recover in time for the Cup, and if he does, he is certain to be on the squad at the very least. So he's been with Ghana since 2016. He has 40 caps and 13 goals. I'll come to that a bit later. And he is 29 years old. So he's with Arsenal in England now and has been since 2020. And he was with Atletico Madrid before that. So played for clubs in Spain throughout his career. His first tournament was the 2017 African Cup, and he was a starter in that tournament as well as the 2019 and 21 African Cups. So a real fixture for them is Thomas Partey and a definite candidate. Mohamed Kudus, what did we have him as a... we only had him as a likely candidate. I'm not sure why. He's very popular. There's a lot of excitement among Ghanaian fans about him. And he started all 6 of their games since the 2020, since the recent African Cup. However, he was not part of that African Cup. He was on the roster, but he wasn't on the bench for any of the 3 games. I was confused. And it turned out he had a fractured rib, I think. Yeah, he had a fractured rib for that tournament. We didn't know that at the time. We fully expected to see him. But now he's recovered from that fractured rib. He, again, like Thomas Partey, he's a fixture if he's fit. So Mohamed Kudus has been with the team since 2019, and he has 16 caps and 5 goals. So despite being central midfielders, both he and Thomas Partey seem to score quite a few goals. And we'll talk about that a bit later. He's just 22 years old, so got a long future ahead of him. And he plays for Ajax in the Netherlands and played for in Denmark before that. So as mentioned, he didn't. He was injured for the 2021 African Cup. So really still awaiting his first tournament because he didn't play any games in that one. A likely candidate is Edrusu Baba. So he started 3 of their 6 games since the 2022 African Cup, or the African Cup last January. And he, in addition to starting 3, subbed in for 1. And he was also a starter in the 2021 African Cup. However, he got injured in game 2 at 65 minutes in, and that injury ended his tournament. But he's recovered now. And he's been with the team since 2019 and has 18 caps. He's 26 years old, and he plays for Mallorca in Spain and has played for Spanish clubs. He's been loaned out quite a bit from his clubs and with the Mallorca B team. But there we have it. At 26 years old, a bit of a latecomer, at least to tournaments. His first tournament was in 2021. Next on the list is Edmund Addo, also likely. He started 3 of their 6 games since the African Cup and was subbed in for 1 other. And he was part of the squad for the recent African Cup, but just as a sub, although he came in quite early into games 2 and 3, halftime in the case of game 3. He's been with the team since 2021, and he has 8 caps and is 22 years old, so quite young. And he plays for Sheriff Tiraspol in Moldova. That's the team that kind of surprised in the Europa Cup there. Maybe he was part of the reason they surprised, I'm not sure. Anyway, the African Cup, recent African Cup, was his first tournament. Okay, and we have as possible Mubarak Wakaso. Mubarak Wakaso is a veteran with the team, but we only have him as a possible candidate because he started. He hasn't been starting for the squad. He started the last 2 of their games of the 6 games we talked about. So those would be the 2 in Japan, the friendlies, and otherwise subbed into 1. And for the 2021 African Cup, he was another player like Mohamed Kudus, who was placed on the roster but didn't end up being on the bench. So I was searching for information as to whether he too was injured or something like that, but none of my sources were giving me that information. So I'll try to update that in the podcast. But, indications are that he hasn't been playing, or I know he hasn't been playing for the team. I just don't know the reason why. But he is a veteran. He is a veteran of the team. He has 70 caps since 2012 and 13 goals. And for a while, he's been playing in China. He's with Shenzhen FC now, and with Jiangsu Suning before that. He moved to China in 2020 from Alaves in Spain, and played most of his career in Spain before that, including with Villarreal. And he's been on the Ghana squad since, I said 2012, but tournament-wise from 2013. He was a starter in the 2013 African Cup. In fact, he won the award for the top scorer of the tournament. That's a bit of a surprise. I think he was a penalty taker. Anyway, I won't dwell on him too much. He was part of every tournament since then, but only a sub for the World Cup 2014 and in the African Cup 2015. He was a sub who gained a starting position and has been a starter ever since. But as mentioned in the 2022 World Cup, in the recent African Cup, there seemed to be some kind of a problem, perhaps an injury. So we'll have to wait and see whether he plays some of their games between then and now. But for that reason, we put him as a possible candidate, despite his being a veteran on the team. Okay, moving on to players who seem to be off the squad. Central midfielders seem to be off the squad. We have Emmanuel Lamote. He plays for Malmo in Sweden, but hasn't appeared for the national team since September 2021. And we have Majid Ashimeru, who hasn't appeared for the national squad since 2021, but he also has a pretty good club affiliation. He plays for Anderlecht in Belgium and Red Bull Salzburg in Austria before that. So those are pretty good clubs. So I wouldn't be surprised to see him come back into play. I'm just going to move him up from a little bit on the list. I just have to take a sip of water here, so please accept a bit of a delay. All right, sorry about that. Okay, so a review of central midfielders. It's a very busy position. We have Thomas Partey and Mohamed Kudus, who, if fit, are definite candidates. And we have Idrisu Baba and Edmund Addo, who will likely be on the World Cup squad and possibly starters, but I don't want to commit to that. And then Mubarak Wakaso, who is a bit up in the air because we don't know why he's been missing quite a few games recently. So we'll try to find out that information for the update podcast. All right, moving on to the left and right sides. I said we don't have a lot of candidates here. We actually had in the previous podcast we had Andre Ayew as a left midfielder, but that was basically a mistake, and he's an attacking midfielder. So, but they do have a player coming in who is a possible candidate as a left midfielder, and his name is Christopher Antuiadje. So Christopher Antuiadje is not dead new to the team because I believe he was on the bench for one or more games in 2019. Or maybe that was where he earned his first cap, actually. So he just has one cap for the team. And even though he's new to the team, he's 28 years old and he plays for Bochum in Germany. And sorry, I should start with why he is being considered a possible candidate. So he started one of their 6 games since the recent African Cup, and he was also subbed in for one. And those were the 2 friendlies in Japan. So maybe not a strong bid there as a candidate for the World Cup, but there we have it. He has played recent games, so he plays for Bochum in Germany. On the right midfielders, we have no definite, likely, or even possible candidates. We do have an interesting character in Jeffrey Schlupp, who seems to be off the squad. We'll come back to that. And 2 other players who seem to be off the squad, Rashid Norti and Kwame Opoku. So we'll go back to Jeffrey Schlupp and talk a little bit about him because it's an interesting case. His club affiliation is very good. He's with Crystal Palace in England, and he was with Leicester in England from 2010 to 17. In fact, part of the shock Premier League win that Leicester pulled in 2015-16. So he was born in Germany, but has spent even his youth career in England. But he has never been selected, despite that good club affiliation, has never been selected for any tournament. He was first considered. He's been on the team since 2011, on and off. I can't believe this story. 2011 on and off, but has never been selected for a tournament. So it's really odd. He last appeared for the national team in September 2021. So it's really surprising that he's never been selected. But we have to say that he seems to be off the squad because he hasn't played for them recently, you know. Okay, we won't spend as much time on Rashid Norti. Rashid Norti last appeared for the team in June 2021, and he had a cap in June 2021. So that's his claim to at least being on the list here. Kwame Opoku last appeared for the national team in 2021. He plays in Algeria. He has 3 caps in 2021, but not since September of that year. So we'll throw those names out there. They may, they may end up coming into the picture, but as for now, they seem to be off the squad. All right, we'll move over to left wingers. And sorry, I said they didn't have a lot of left wingers. They didn't when we did the podcast in just about 6 or 8 months ago. But now suddenly there's a few candidates. So we have a likely candidate in Kalmadine Sulemana, and we have 3 possible candidates in Joseph Paintsil, Yaw Yaboa, and Daniel Afriyie. And then we have two candidates or two players who seem to be off the squad in Tariq Fosu-Henry and Emmanuel Gyasi. So going back to the top, Kalmadine Sulemana, we consider him a likely candidate because even though he started none of their games since the African Cup, he was subbed in for one, and he was injured for the first two of those two Nigeria matches in the playoffs. But yeah, maybe we should move him down to possible. But anyway, he was on the squad for the 2021 African Cup, and he started all three games. So that's why we have him as a likely. But I got to say, he lined up as in position, a left attacking midfielder for game one and a left forward for game two. But then he was a right midfielder in game three. So we may have to move him to a versatile midfielder if he continues to roam around the field like that. He has been with the team since 2020 and has 11 caps, and he's only 20 years old. So a young player. And got that start in the 2021 African Cup. He plays for Reims in France. The first possible candidate is Joseph Paintsil, and he started one of their games since the recent African Cup and was on the bench for two others. And he also was a starter in the 2021 African Cup. However, he lost his starting position after game two and was just a substitute in games 2 and 3, although he saw a pretty good field time coming in the 60th minute and 65th minute there. He's been with the team since 2017 and has 6 caps, so that's not a lot of caps during that time. He's kind of been in and around, but he is only 24 years old, so has some time. He plays with Genk in Belgium, and he is a possible candidate. Next one is Yaya Boa, and Yaya Boa started none of their games since the African Cup, but he was on the bench for 2 of those and injured for the last 4 matches. So perhaps he was making inroads. However, he didn't make inroads in terms of tournaments. He's never played in a tournament. So he has 4 caps since 2019 and is 25 years old. He also plays for Columbus Crew in the United States. He just moved there, kind of an unlikely move, from Wisła Krakow in Poland all the way over to Columbus Crew in the USA. So the agent must have kind of arranged a little travel trip for himself and found him a team on the other side of the world. So Yaya Boa, a possible candidate. Daniel Afriyie is the third possible candidate. He's a young player, 21 years old, and he got his first cap in June of this year, and but just subbed into one of those friendlies. So he was brought over for the to Japan for the tournament, was on the bench for 1 game and subbed into another. And he's a local player in Ghana with Hearts of Oak and just has that 1 cap, but maybe a candidate for the future unless he makes a real impression over the next few months. And finally, we'll take a quick look at Tariq Fosu-Henry and Emmanuel Gyasi. I'm not sure if it's Gyasi or Gyasi, but anyway, Tariq Fosu-Henry last appeared for the national team on the bench in November 2020, so he's well out of the picture. However, I do have him here because of his club affiliations. He's with Brentford, who have recently promoted to the Premier League, and he's been with them since 2022. However, I don't think he wasn't kept basically for that promotion. Rather, he was loaned to Stoke in England. Still a pretty respectable team. So club affiliations might make him more of a consideration there. Emmanuel Gyasi last appeared for the national team in June 2021, and he plays for Spezia in Italy. So he got 3 caps in 2021, but none since June of that year. So seems to be out of the picture, but not beyond the realm of possibility that he might come back. So in review there, we have a likely candidate in Kalmadine Sulemana and possible candidates in Joseph Pinksel, Yoya Boa, and Daniel Afriyie. His family's going to phone and give me hell, I know it. Okay, for right wingers, we just have one candidate in the possible category, and that is Osman Bukhari. Osman Bukhari started one of their 6 games since the recent African Cup, and he was subbed in for 3 others, so that pushed him up to possible for us. He didn't go for that trip to Japan, but then some of the good players didn't make that trip either. He wasn't selected for the African Cup in 2021 or the recent African Cup. But in 2021, he did get 6 caps and 1 goal. And he's 24 years old and plays for Red Star Belgrade in Serbia. Okay, well, that is Osman Bukhari, the possible right winger. Now we move on to the kind of the forward line. I include attacking midfielders in the forward line. A bit of a random division point there, but here we go. So just as a note, going back to our original notes there, their formation changes quite a bit. So these players adjust position accordingly. So there's a bit of fluidity in the attacking midfielders. They may play as wingers. They may even play as forwards. And so these labels are a bit artificial, but we have Andre Ayew as an attacking midfielder / forward, and he is obviously a well-known player. Right, so let's talk about his recent history, because he hasn't actually been playing as much as all that. He scored 3 of their 8 goals in qualifying. There, he was their co-top scorer, and but he only started 3 of their 6 games since the since the recent African Cup, and he subbed in for 1. If you did watch that African Cup, you saw he got a bit of a harsh red card in game 3, and that really played a role in kind of scuttling their tournament, as they lost, I think it was to Comoros in that game. So he was serving a 2-match suspension after that. So that's why he has only started 3 of the games. He's the captain of, so he was a starter, of course, in the 2021 African Cup, as well as the captain. And but he did get the boot from game 3 with a red card. I think it was 25 minutes into the game. So he is the captain of the team. He has been on the team since 2007 and has 107 caps and 23 goals. Wow, what a career. And that career is probably just a few years from the end, because he's 33 years old right now. And he did play in the English League there from 2018 to 21 with Swansea. But now he's moved to Al Sadd in Qatar since 2021. He's been with some big clubs. He was with West Ham in England and Marseille in France. And he's the son, of course, of Abidi Pele, the famous Abidi Pele, who at 17 years old helped win the African Cup in Libya in 1982. So the whole family is very well known in Ghana. And I don't want to dwell too much on him. Suffice to say, he's been a part of every tournament, except oddly the 2013 African Cup, where he basically declined to play. He kind of ruled himself unable to play, but otherwise he's been very loyal to the national team and has been a starter throughout, and a captain since 2019. So the famous Andre Ayew, along with his brother, who we also consider a definite candidate. And oops, I'm supposed to kind of name the candidates first before I go through them in more detail. So I will do that. definite candidates: Andre Ayew, Jordan Ayew, and Isahaku Abdul Fatawu as a definite candidate. And then we have Daniel Kofi Kiera as a likely candidate, and then Samuel Owusu as a possible but unlikely, and David Abagna as a player who seems to be off the team. And I'm just going to mention a couple of retired veterans or excuse me, veterans who don't seem to be part of the picture anymore in Christian Atsu and Kwadwo Asamoah. We'll just give them a kind of a farewell, I guess. Okay, so we did Andre Ayew, and now we'll take a look at Jordan Ayew. So a few less caps than his brother, and he joined the team 3 years later. So he's been with the team since 2010, and he has 81 caps and 19 goals, and he is 31 years old, so 2 years younger than Andre. He started all 4 of their games since the recent African Cup and subbed into one other and was on the bench for the other. So still very much in the picture. He was a starter in the 2021 African Cup as well. And he plays for Crystal Palace in England and has done so since 2019. He played alongside his brother at Swansea for a little while there. And he was with clubs in France before he moved to England. Aston Villa was his first club in England. So he was born in France. I'm not sure if I have that note. Oh, yes. So they were both born in France, I think, because Abidi Pele was playing for French clubs. I'm not sure. I'm just speculating on that. I should check it. Okay, so he's been with the national team since the 2012 African Cup, and I have a note for him for 2013. We saw that his brother didn't play in that cup, and my note for Jordan is under a self-imposed exile. I'm not really sure what that means. I should look into that. It seems like an interesting story. But he too has been quite consistent with the national team, starting in all tournaments except from 2012 onwards, except for that 2013 African Cup. I mean, I could wax on forever about these guys' achievements and accomplishments, but we'd better move on. So they're definite candidates anyway. Maybe this would be their last tournament, or at least Andre's. Okay, the next definite candidate is Isahaku Abdul Fatawu. So he started 4 of the 6 games since the 2022 African Cup, and he was subbed in for the other 2. So he seems to have gained a more firm footing. Perhaps he was replacing Andre, but he seems to be getting more field time than he did during the African Cup, which he was selected for last January, but he was just a sub. He was subbed into games 1 and 2, and kind of late at that. So, but he did go on to start game 3 himself, so got a bit of field time there. He's actually used more as a left winger there, and he's been with the team since 2021 and has 12 caps, and he's very young. He's 18 years old. So possibly 17 years old when he played in the African Cup there. And he's with Sporting Lisbon in Portugal, so a very promising young player. He moved to Sporting Lisbon recently from Ghana, from Standfast, not even that big a club as far as I know in Ghana. So a big move there, and looks like a name for the future or even for the upcoming African Cup. Next, we have Daniel Kofi Kiera. Daniel Kofi Kiera started 1 of their 6 games since the 2022 African Cup and was subbed in for 3 others. So seems to be making inroads here. In fact, he did in the African Cup too, because he was subbed into game 1, late, and then he gained a starting position for games 2 and 3. Now he is the player who I said was selected over Edmund Addo. Is it Edmund? Edmund Addo as a central midfielder. So he's an attacking midfielder, but he got the nod ahead of a central midfielder for that game. Otherwise, he played as a left midfielder in game 3. So he's been with the team since 2021, and he has 12 caps and is 26 years old. And he plays for Freiburg in Germany and has been with German clubs from his youth. I don't have a note here that he was born in Germany, but at least his youth career was in Germany. So Daniel Kofi Chiera, not young, 26, but new to the squad and making inroads. Samuel Owusu is a possible but unlikely player. He last appeared in the recent African Cup, and in that cup he was, of course, on the roster and appeared only in game 3 as a substitute. He subbed in for the last 9 minutes there. He's been with the team since 2019 and has 17 caps and 1 goal, and is 26 years old. And he plays for Kukariki in Serbia and played in Saudi Arabia before that. Actually, that's his second time with Kukariki in Serbia. And he also played in Turkey. And he was a part of the squad for the 2019 African Cup, where he was just a sub. But he was subbed into games 1 and 2, both early at 35 and 15. But he suffered the ignominy. He suffered the ignominy of being subbed into a game and then subbed out of a game. Which was unfortunate. It really was a tactical decision after someone had received a red card, but nobody likes that. I don't even like seeing it. Okay, the seems to be off the squad is David Abagna, and I believe we were surprised when he was named to the squad in our last podcast. So he was named to the squad for the 2021 African Cup. He was on the roster but saw no action. He wasn't even on the bench for games 1 and 2. And that was his last appearance for the national team. But he's only 24 years old, so he might come back. He plays actually for Real Tamale in Ghana. Okay, and then we'll just make quick mention of a couple of players who seem to be on their way out. So Christian Atsu was a great forward, especially in the 2015 African Cup, where he really kind of stole the show. And he was on the team from 2012 to 2019. Now, he really isn't that old. He's 30 years old, but it's almost as if he is aging out here. In terms of clubs too, because he was with Chelsea in England from 2013 to 17, and then Newcastle, and then he moved to Al Raid in Saudi Arabia in 2021. Now he's not attached to any club. So he had a pretty good career, which started with the Porto Youth Club in Portugal, and he was on the national team through the 2013 African Cup and the 2014 World Cup, all the way to the 2019 African Cup, where he got an injury in game 2, 15 minutes into game 2, which ended his tournament. And I wonder if that injury kind of had lasting effects on him. As far as the national team goes, that was the last time he appeared for them. So a great player who I remember really liking. I think it was actually in the 2014 World Cup where I took notice of him, and seems to be off the team. Kwadwo Asamoah, I won't go into so much detail because he's been off the team for quite a while now. His story is he was with the team from 2008 to 2019, and was kind of at his peak in around 2010. So he was a starter in the 2010 World Cup and also in the 2014 World Cup. But after that, for the 2015 African Cup, he was injured and didn't play in that tournament or in 2017. And he did kind of come back a little bit for the 2019 African Cup, but he only started one game there and also subbed into one game. So a bit long gone from the squad, but because he did pop up recently, I thought I would give him a kind of a mention and a farewell. He's 36 years old, 34 years old. So maybe not completely out of the picture. He played for big clubs like Juventus and Inter Milan, and but he may be retired now because he's not attached to any club. So Christian Atsu and Kwadwo Atamoa, kind of players of the past there. And the players of the present in review, attacking midfielders Andre Ayew, Jordan Ayew, and the young Isahaku Abdul Fatawu are definite candidates and likely as Daniel Kofi Kiera. And we've talked about a couple of candidates who may come up. For secondary strikers, we don't have anyone on Ghana who fits that role. And so we move on to forwards. And we have one definite candidate in Felix Afena-Gyan. And we have three possible candidates, Kwasi Okier-Reed as a possible, and Benjamin Tefe, and Antoine Semenyo. And as seems to be off the team, we have John Antwi and Richard Boake. Oh, and Caleb Ekuban and Joel Famamea and Maxwell Abikwe. And we'll also talk about Asamoah Gyan and kind of bid farewell to him. So just the sheer number of names there is telling the story of the forwards. So basically, when we did the last podcast, they don't have one. So it's probably the Ayew brothers who kind of step into that role, or some other attacking midfielder. And we didn't have a definite or likely candidate. And we saw a couple of names pop up. Now, those players who popped up for the African Cup 2021 didn't play, and some of them haven't played since, so they didn't really make any inroads. I mean, I was absolutely shocked when they used a player who was brand new, not even he was a consideration for the African Cup, but he didn't make the squad. A brand new player as the sole forward when they were playing their two playoff games against Nigeria. I thought, how bold to bring in, an inexperienced forward for such an important game. I'll talk more about it soon. I'll talk about it now. That player was Felix Afena-Gyan. Anyway, no, just to finish what I was saying. So they seem to have been scrambling to find a forward, and they still seem to be scrambling to find a forward. So you'll see that all of these players are quite young and new to the team. And honestly, they may have found one in Felix Afena-Gyan, but beyond him, they still haven't really settled on anyone. Felix Afena-Gyan, so as I said, took me completely by surprise by starting both games in the World Cup playoff against Nigeria, and has played 5 of their 6 games since the African Cup and subbed in for one other. He was new to the squad when he was named to the preliminary squad for the recent African Cup, and he was selected, as I said, for the preliminary squad, but he didn't make the final cut, which is odd in itself. So he is 19 years old, and he has 6 caps and 1 goal, all since after the African Cup. So, And he played for Roma in Italy. But talk about fresh news here. It was just 2 days ago that he was sold to Cremonese in Italy. Now, one of the sources say he had signed a 6-year contract with Roma in 2021. So that was looking good. But he then was suddenly sold to Cremonese in Italy, which, as far as I know, they may have moved up recently, but that's not a big name in my mind as an Italian club. But certainly being with Rome, and he was playing games for Roma, was a good kind of credibility thing, and obviously helped earn him the starting spot for the Ghanaian team. It'll be interesting to see whether that step down in club affiliation affects this situation. So there we go. They seem to have found a forward, and as things look now, he looks like a definite candidate. But we will have to see. Okay, moving on to the possible candidates. We have Kwasi Okia-Reet. He was born in Germany, and he was a consideration for the African Cup in 2021. I'm just trying to see where we had him at that time. We had him as possible, but unlikely. Now he's moved up to possible. He didn't start any of their games since the recent African Cup, but he subbed in for 3 and was on the bench for 2. So he seems to be catching the eyes of the administration there. He's been with the team since 2018, so he's 26 years old, but he didn't seem to make inroads. He wasn't on the African Cup 2019 or 2021 squad, and so recently has just made his way into the team. He plays for a team called Holstein Kiel in Germany. That's a pretty small club. I'm not even really familiar with the name. And he moved there just recently, just this year. He was with Willem II in the Netherlands, which I do know. And actually, he was with Bayern Munich too in Germany. But Bayern Munich, their secondary club, or maybe I'll have to check this for the update. Maybe a couple of caps for Bayern Munich. Anyway, we move on to another possible candidate, Benjamin Tete. So he started the last of their 6 games since the 2022 African Cup and was subbed in for 1, and but not selected for either of those playoff matches against Nigeria. Now, he was selected for the African Cup, but he was only a sub in that, kind of coming in late for games 1 and 2. He actually got in trouble, if you watch that cup, got in trouble. He got a red card on the sidelines. He was just on the bench, but he actually really hauled off and punched a Gabonese player and then ran away to the dressing room to hide there. But the referee made it clear that he was getting a red card. So nevertheless, he has been back with the team after that, and he plays for Hull in England since 2022, and with Yeni Malatyaspor in Turkey before that, and Sparta Prague before that. So he's kind of been all over the place in his club career. And but as far as Ghana goes, he's only been with the team since 2021, and he has 7 caps and is 25 years old. So Benjamin Tete, possible candidate. And the last possible candidate is Antoine Semenyo. So he, interestingly, his first and only appearance, no, that can't be right because he's 22 years old. Okay, well, I'll just say that he was born in England, and he has 1 cap, which was this year, and is 22 years old. He plays for Bristol City in England. I think some of the information I had for him there was wrong, so I don't want to say it. I should check it. Okay, and finally, several players who are no longer with the team, so I'll go through them quickly. One is John Antwi. So he is actually 30 years old and only has 2 caps, so didn't ever really make it onto the team. Last appeared on the bench in March 2021. He does play for Pyramids in Egypt, which is a fairly good club. Okay, Richmond Boyake. He's been in and around the Ghana club the Ghana national team for a long time. And you can see by his caps, he's been with the team since 2012, but only has 19 caps. He's 29 years old now. I must say, he has 7 goals in those 19 caps, which is pretty impressive. He plays for Lamia in Greece now. That was a recent move from Beitar Jerusalem in Israel, and actually the variety of clubs he's played for is quite impressive, but I won't go into it. It seemed like he was always trying to get onto the national team, but in 2013 he was selected but didn't see any action, and then he wasn't selected until finally was selected for the last African Cup. And he subbed into games 1 and 3 there. However, that was the last time he appeared for the team, so he doesn't seem to be on it anymore. Yeah, a bit of a story of frustration, it seems, for Richmond Boyake, and has an outside chance, especially given how few forwards they seem to have. Caleb Ekuban. Last appeared for the national team in November 2021. He was on the squad for the African Cup 2019, but was on the bench except for 2 games that he subbed into. But he wasn't selected for the 2021 African Cup. So he plays with Genoa in Italy and was with Trabzonspor in Turkey before that, and Leeds United before that. So pretty good club affiliations there. But as far as the national team, just that 1 cup tournament in 2019 where he was a sub. Joel Famea last appeared for the national team in September 2021. He's with Rubin Kazan in Russia. Not one of the players, actually. There's quite a few players who played in Russia, but you see that they've gone to a different country because of recent political events. He hasn't. In fact, he recently moved to Rubin Kazan in 2022, having played for Orenburg in Russia from 2019 to 22. But I'm kind of going down a rabbit hole there. He had 6 caps for the national team from 2015, but the 25-year-old has never played in a tournament, so not even the recent African Cup. So pretty far from reaching the squad. Maxwell Abikwe, on the other hand, did play in the African Cup. He was a bit of a surprise selection in their scramble for forwards, I guess. However, even though he was brought to the Cup, he did not see any action in the Cup. And the last time he was actually on the field for Ghana was, never. He has 0 caps. I wasn't trying to be funny there. I just thought he would have had some caps, but no, he has no caps for the team. He's quite young at 24 years old. I got confused there because I have a note. He last appeared for the national team in the African Cup. So he didn't have any appearances even on the bench before being named to the squad. That's why it was a surprise to us. So just someone it seems they looked at in their mad scramble to find a forward, and one of many who didn't work out for them. And all of this is a long-term project to replace the great Asamoah Gyan. So we gave a longer biography in the previous podcast, so I won't go through it all again, but he's a very big name for them and was with the team from 2003 to 2019. 109 caps and 51 goals. That pretty much tells it all, you know. And he was actually kind of off the team by the 2019 African Cup, but he was selected and subbed into 2 games there. But really, his time was before that. I'd say really from about 2006 to 2014 were kind of his prime years. He played 3 World Cups and was a noticeable character in them. Okay, so we also have, nope, that's it. That ends our discussion of the players. And there are a couple that we didn't we didn't kind of review. So I'll review the forwards here. We have Felix Afenagian as a definite, and we have a few possible candidates in Kwasi Okiarit, Benjamin Tete, and Antoine Semenyo. But I got to be honest and say that their search still seems to be continuing, because even if they have found one forward, that's not enough, and they're going to need a few. So until then, though, they've been using attacking midfielders, especially the Ayew brothers. So we'll go through the team a little bit later in review and kind of looking at the starters. But we'll just do a couple of notes here. So I'll go back to some of the issues we talked about at the beginning that emerged from the previous podcast. Hi, Cat. My cat is standing beside me, meowing. I don't have food for you. Okay, this is off topic. Okay, so the first issue was goalkeeper and whether they've settled on a goalkeeper. And in short, they haven't. They haven't settled on a goalkeeper, I would say. It seems to be a bit between Walcott and Atizigi, but there is a chance that Ofori will come back in. So we'll kind of keep an eye out for that. The second issue that emerged at the beginning was an overload of central midfielders with not many right and left midfielders, especially kind of more defensively minded midfielders. But what we saw was that the central midfielders are starting in those positions. That's all I have to say about that. And finally, we have the ongoing issue of no forwards. So there were no definite or possible forwards when we did the podcast last time. They seem to have found one now, and the Ayew brothers kind of fill in otherwise. But the mad scramble seems to continue because they're kind of trying out players and trying them and tossing them, trying them and tossing them. So that's why we had so many players at the forward line who were in the seems to be not on the team anymore position. Okay, now we take a quick look at their club affiliations. So they're quite solid as far as this goes. Almost all of their players play in Europe, and a couple with some big clubs like Baba Rahman for Chelsea and Isaku Fatua for Sporting Lisbon. And then, respectable clubs. Jordan Ayew is a noticeable player for Crystal Palace almost every week. We have a couple of players playing for Columbus Crew, which is one of the top teams in the USA. And Richard Ofori is with Orlando Pirates, one of the top teams in South Africa. Otherwise, most of the teams are kind of, I would say, secondary or smaller teams. Sorry, I forgot to mention Thomas Partey at Arsenal. Kind of the big clubs, but then most of the others are at respectable but smaller clubs like Genk in Belgium, Bristol City in England, Strasbourg in France, like that. Celta de Vigo is a pretty decent club. Club Bruges in Belgium, this is the type of club they're with. Andre Ayew is the only one kind of playing outside of Europe in Al Sadd. And no, we saw that Mubarak Wakaso was playing for Shenzhen in China. Okay, so I would say probably Morocco and Senegal have more bigger club affiliations, but I would say that this is a bit better than Cameroon and Tunisia. Of course, that's very subjective and it's a bit elitist too. So I'm always a bit reluctant when I get to this part. I really don't know. I really don't like the idea that, ooh, if you play for a European club, then you're a better player than someone who's playing for a good club in Africa or Asia. But I just throw it out there and you can form your own opinion. Now, I've worked on a couple of stats. I'm kind of happy about this. Um, I've got total number of candidates that we listed. So what I did here was I took the definite, likely, and possible candidates, and I kind of put them into a chart and did a little math with them. So Ghana in that had a total number of 38 candidates. Now, this makes a bit more sense when we compare with other African teams or with other teams. And it's a new thing I'm doing. So I've only done the African teams so far. But they have 38 candidates that we listed as possible, likely, or definite. That is a lot more than other teams. Senegal only had 24, and we did note that they were a very steady group of players. The average right now among the African teams is 30, and Ghana has 38, so quite a bit more than the other teams. And part of that is they kind of scramble to find a forward, but they're trying out a lot of new players. And I'm a bit worried, I must say, about a team trying out a lot of players at this point. You know what I mean? Okay, the next stat is the average age of the squad. So 25.7. And I suppose that goes hand in hand with trying out a lot of players because the average is 26.7, and this is on the young side. Morocco also has a young side too, whereas Senegal, they're kind of veteran team, veteran group of solid players is the oldest among the African teams. So 25.7, a bit of a younger team. The average number of caps among those players logically should be lower because they tend to be trying out a lot of new players, and in fact is quite low. The average is 23.5, but they are 18.2, and that's including the fact that the Ayew brothers have so many caps. I'll just take a look at that because I've kind of organized them. So Andre Ayew has 106 caps. I think I said 107 in the podcast. The numbers may be a bit different. Jordan Ayew, 81 caps. Mubarak Wakasu, 80, and Jonathan Mensah, 69. Then it jumps down to 46 for Baba Rahman. And pretty quickly it jumps down into the 20s and 10s. So a lot of players there have less than one cap. That is more than half the players have less than 10 caps. So I won't drone on about it, but it tells us something that they have a fairly we could say an inexperienced squad as far as that goes, especially if you factor the Ayew brothers out of the equation. And the final one I have is total goals. So among these players that I've listed, they have 78 goals, and that is lower than average. The average is 83. So again, if you factor out the Ayew brothers, that would be a lot lower. So you can make of that what you will, but it tells us a little bit about the squad. They're not really decided on their final squad, especially in the goalkeeper and forward line, and trying out a lot of new players. Now we're going to look at players and issues to watch. I should change the title here. Players and issues to watch. So in defense, we have, is the goalkeeper going to be Wallacott or Atizagi or Atizigi, or indeed will Richard Aforu come back to give the team a little bit more experience, at least on the bench? Also in defence, will Jiku hold down that central defence position alongside Amarty, or will some of the other candidates kind of be considered, as they seem to be in some of the recent games? For left defence, we have a question of Baba Rahman. Baba Rahman versus Gideon Mensah. So it looks like Baba Rahman is the starter, but Gideon Mensah has provided a bit of a challenge there. Players and questions in the midfield. Well, a lot of the bigger names are in the midfield. So we have two of their biggest names, Thomas Partey, Mohamed Kudu. We also have Mubarak Wakasu. So some of their bigger names are kind of in the central midfielders. So keep an eye on those players when you're watching the Cup. And on the attack, of course, we have the Ayew brothers, who, because they don't seem to have found anyone beyond Felix Afena-Gyan, it'll probably be the Ayew brothers in the attack. And finally, in the attack, a player to keep an eye on is Felix Afena-Gyan. Now, I just want to share this little graphic here, and this is the percentage of goals, of these players. So Andre Ayew scores in 21.7% of his games, and Jordan Ayew is a little bit higher at 23.5%. Felix Afena-Gyan is at 20%, but that's just one goal in 5 games, so really hasn't played enough games to tell. But some surprise big scorers are from the central midfielders. So we noted it during the podcast. Mubarak Wakaso has 13 goals in 70 games, so is at almost 19% there. Mohamed Kudus has 5 goals in 15 games, so really needs a few more games to check, but that's 26.7%. And the player with the highest percent of scoring, to my surprise, is, I'll give you a few moments to guess. No, not the Ayew brothers. No, not the new forward they got. No, not someone who's now off the team like Gian Asamoah. It is Thomas Partey, the central midfielder, with 13 goals in 40 games, for the only player who's above 30%. So that means he scores 1 in 3 games, 32.5%. I was very surprised by that. And actually 32.5% is a pretty good ratio, even for a forward. So just a little bit of fun there. So you can look for those guys to get their gold, maybe Thomas Partey. Keep an eye on him and Mohamed Kudus coming up from the midfield. Okay, in terms of new players, we have quite a few, but we won't necessarily go through them all. But we have Felix Afena-Gyan, probably the most exciting one to watch in the forward line, because he is getting a starting position there. And similarly, although he starts kind of as a left midfielder or left winger so far, but Isahaku Abdul Fatua, he's with Sporting Lisbon. The right winger, Osman Bukhari, also seems quite interesting. A young player with just 6 caps. And then we have a couple of players in defence. Alidou Seydou, he's listed as a central defender, but one of his 2 starts was on the right wing, so maybe challenging Yiadom for that position. And yeah, we'll leave it at that. I'll maybe Benjamin Tete was one of the forwards that they tried out, who seems to have kind of clung on a little bit. At least he started the last of their 6 games after the African Cup. And he may, I mean, given the lack of forwards they have, they might have to choose players that they're not particularly sold on. Okay, and the last thing we'll look at is any injuries. And we only have one actually to a player who's not really established on the squad, but Montari Kanaheni. So it looked like he was making his way onto the squad. Then he got a cruciate ligament injury. So we might never know actually, because that injury may leave him, may continue until the Cup. Notable absences, finally, Richard Ofori, and maybe not absent, there's still a chance he'll be there, but that's the most experienced goalkeeper available to them. We were surprised they didn't choose him for the Cup. The ever-absent Jeffrey Schlupp, who has a good club affiliation with Crystal Palace in England. That's actually the same team as Jordan Ayew, so both of them play there. Has had good club affiliations, but somehow has never been able to make it onto the national team. But I wouldn't be surprised if they suddenly brought him up. And then we say goodbye to a number of players. Gian Asamoah, definitely retired. Christian Atsu, an outside chance of him coming back into the team because he's only 29. And Kwadwo Asamoah, 74 caps, but 34 years old, and does seem to be at the end of his career. So it's probably a farewell to them. Okay, well, we're going to finish by just going through the starting lineup here. So I'll kind of copy what we had for the squad for those watching YouTube into the bottom here. And for those who are actually just joining us for this party, just want a quick overview. This is it. Okay, so for goalkeepers, for manager, we have Milovan Rajovic out, fired after they failed to pass the group stage of the 2021 African Cup in January 2022. And we have Otto Addo coming in, an ex-player for the club who has been kind of part of the administration for a little while and moved up from interim manager to manager. As far as goalkeepers go, we have a definite candidate in Lawrence Atiziki, but definite to make the squad, but I'm not so sure definite to be the starter. Jojo Wallacott is also a candidate, and he was the starter in 2021, but may have lost that position. And possible candidates, Richard Ofori and Abdul Nuruddin. Richard Ofori was the starter in 2019 and has the most experience. I wouldn't be surprised if they call him back, but he doesn't seem to be in favor, in their views right now. Central defense, we have Daniel Amarty as a definite starter, and it looks like Alexander Jiku is the starter alongside of him, but he hasn't played recent games, which made me put him down to likely. If he's not the starter, it'll be probably among Jonathan Mensah, Alidou Seydou, Joseph Adu, or Abdul Mumin. As far as left backs go, we think Baba Rahman is going to be the starter, although he has been challenged a little bit for the role by Gideon Mensah. Nevertheless, both of them will probably be there for the Cup. And there is a chance for Dennis Nkrumah Korsa to also be selected. For right backs, Andy Yiadom and Dennis O'Doy are likely candidates to be there, but Andy Yiadom hasn't nailed down the starting position. And in fact, central defender Alidou Seydou actually moved over for one of the recent games. So they don't seem particularly sold on him. For possible candidates in the defensive midfield is Alicia Owusu, but if he makes the team, he'll probably be on the bench. However, central midfielders will probably be not only selected, but likely to start as well. So Thomas Partey and Mohamed Kudus we consider definite, and Idrisu Baba and Edmund Addo. I'd say definitely Idrisu Baba. I'll put him as a starter, and Edmund Addo as a substitute will probably be there. The status of Mubarak Wakasu is a bit up in the air because I haven't figured out why he hasn't been playing games recently, but he is a veteran, and I wouldn't be surprised if he makes the squad. In the left midfield, well, we saw that they're pretty short of left midfielders and right midfielders, so we only have one possible candidate in Christopher Antwi Adjei, but I'm not ready to say that he has a good chance of making the squad. We'll see in upcoming games. On the left wing, a likely candidate is Kamaldeen Sulemana. So I'm going to put him as a substitute rather than as a starter. We also have a couple of possible candidates there. So I wouldn't be surprised if one of them make it anyway, among Joseph Paintsel, Yoya Boa, and Daniel Afriye. Right wingers, though, we only have one possible candidate in Osman Bukhari. So not ready to commit to say he's going to make it to the squad. Now, looking at the attacking line, the attacking midfielders are filling in as forwards as they desperately scramble to find more of them. But for the time being, Andre Ayew and Jordan Ayew are often filling in the forward role. And Isahaku Abdul Fatua seems a regular on the field, usually playing on the left side. So we consider all three of those definite candidates and starters. A likely candidate is Daniel Kofi Kiera, so we would put him as probably as a substitute, although I wouldn't be surprised to see him on the field. And then among the forwards, they have a lack of forwards. So Felix Afena-Gyan seems to be the only one they seem to have settled on. And he started some recent games, but wasn't in the African Cup. But we have a couple of possible candidates, but I got to say, not strong possibilities. And they seem to try players out and toss them aside as they madly scramble to find a few players for this position. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of the podcast. So this has been a look at Ghana's 2022 players. And keep in mind, we'll be doing an update as new information comes out. That'll probably be in November, early to mid-November. That's when we expect the teams to publish their squad lists, and we'll probably wait until the final team is decided upon for that. So we are Soccerphiles Canada. That's Soccerphiles with a PH in the middle and an S at the end. And you can check out our website at soccerphiles.captivate.fm, or if you want to email us, it's soccerphiles@gmail.com. And you can keep an eye on the show notes and the website. And we have done 9 previous series before that. So if you want to dig into the history of the teams a little bit, you can go to our website for that. Okay, thank you very much. And I hope to see you next time. Bye-bye.